And privileged to welcome you to the daily BW Business World Dialogue. Today, I'm joined by my editorial colleague, Vasudha Mukherjee, in a conversation about something that all of us do. We are storytellers. We're creating stories, we are narrating stories. Stories have become a fabric of our life. And with the social media growing so fast, we need content. And content that is compelling is what is storytelling. So let me welcome the authors of a book called What's Your Story today to our BW Dialogue. Let me welcome Adri, Anjana, and Marybeth to the conversation. Adri has joined us from Europe. It's afternoon there, so sorry to take you away from your siesta, but welcome, Adri. Congratulations to you for writing the book. From India, we have Anjana Menon, who's co-authored the book, and we'll have Marybeth joining in a while. Let me start by asking both of you, first of all, how have been the last 18 months for you, both personally and professionally, since we are doing this in the backdrop of the pandemic?
So I think I would say slow and fast, if I had to describe it. And I think life slowed down quite a bit in the pandemic. In some ways, in a good way, because it took away a lot of the unnecessary running around and sitting on flights for hours, going for meetings, sitting in traffic, going for meetings. So it took away a lot of stuff, which now in hindsight, I think people realize is unnecessary. Just like I think 2 years ago, we would have had this conversation in a studio. And now it's online, people are comfortable with it, they're happy to listen to it. So it freed up a lot of time. And because it freed up a lot of time, it fast forwarded a lot of the writing projects. And so that's why I say it was slow and fast. I was able to finish this book with Audrey and Marybeth, and I have another book that I finished, which is coming out later on in the year. So I managed to write 2 books. And professionally, that was rewarding because, it was constructive. Personally, I think it was difficult. It was difficult because I have close friends and extended family who went through a lot of trauma, who struggled with, family members who had COVID. I lost some friends and acquaintances as well. So that portion was difficult. The speed with which the pandemic hit us and our complete lack of preparedness to something of the scale was an eye-opener. It was very humbling. And I think in hindsight, I'm very grateful that I was safe through it. My immediate family was safe through it. And I think I'm left with a lot of gratitude. If I look back, 2 books and good health, it's a tremendous gift. So I'm very grateful for that.
Absolutely. And Adri, for you, how were the last 18 months?
I agree with much of what Anjana said. I feel very fortunate that my family has been safe and we're all vaccinated now. It's and the time to think and write and reflect on what I've done in my career was helped me move forward and do something absolutely new, which was to write a whole book with my esteemed colleagues, and also to try to think about other projects and to really the fact that the world has become more accepting of remote work and doing everything online, including sessions such as this, which wouldn't have been possible earlier, has only benefited me. So I'm also grateful.
Thank you so much. I would say it was a mixed bag, but we're grateful that we are alive and grateful that we've been able to carry on our work. You've written books, you've ran a media company. Now let me also dive in. How did you come to collaborate? How did this collaboration come together? And of course, as you said, and many more other collaborators who have become authors have said that actually COVID time has been a blessing in the sense that collaboration has become easy. Time has been saved, as Anjana said, and people are more comfortable doing things remotely. So it's been a blessing. We understand that. But how did the idea of this book come about?
The collaboration, which was, I think, relatively easy for us, because we've all worked at one point in time in Bloomberg in Europe. And so we knew each other, we knew each other's working styles. All three of us were very passionate about storytelling. Of course, we moved on from business journalism. I came back to India, I founded a newspaper. Audrey went on to be an award-winning communicator. Maribeth went on to teach. So I think it gave us a breadth of experience, and probably last year was when we had time to think about how to put it together. So the original idea of the book was actually Maribeth and Audrey's. It was a slightly different book to the current one. It was a smaller, shorter book. And then I came in and I added a lot of chapters to the book. And but I would say overall it was really just completely, truly collaborative, and collaborative across time zones and countries, and collaborative also in the sense that it brought together the different experiences that we had as individuals.
Absolutely. Mary Sandel has joined us. Maribeth, thank you for joining us. And you've been a business journalist, having worked for venerable brands like Bloomberg. So congratulations to you. And I would like to now get into the book. Me and Vasudha would dive into the book right now. Now, what's your story? All of us have a story. Why this name? Of course, it's very, in some way, it is explanatory. It is very representative of what you're talking about. What's your story? How did this name come about? Give us what were the other names that you considered and didn't take for the book? And why did this name stick? Mary?
Hi, sorry I was late there. I had trouble getting in, but it worked out okay. This is a great question. It's interesting. I'm sure we had a million other ideas for the title, and I can't remember after spending all the hours that we spent on it, and I almost don't want to remember. I think this one stuck probably because, in our book we say you need to speak to your audience, you need to be engaging, you need to have them respond to you, you need a conversation. And by asking a question about your story brings people back to the story of telling stories. So it stuck. And it was the one that Penguin Random House preferred over many. I guess we had 5 or 6 shortlisted, and so it was.
Now, one of the, when I was reading the book, one of the things that you say in the book is that digital doesn't make it easier. The proliferation of social media, the number of channels, and later you have a chapter on how to deal with each medium on its merit and on its strength. But give our readers and viewers, why do you say that digital doesn't make it easier? I read the book, I know it, but why don't you tell our viewers if there is a playbook to getting around digital content?
So, I will very selfishly say that the playbook is our book. Because it really tells you how to think about your message, how to position your message, which are the channels that you can use, and when to deploy them effectively. If you were to just look back, say, 10 years, and look at the mediums and the ways in which people communicated, probably half or more of the digital channels we have now wasn't big. Social, for example, wasn't big for whether you think of Twitter, you think of Instagram, and multiple other channels. In fact, I think between us writing the book and the book being released, we even had Clubhouse come into the game. So companies are, finding different ways and different platforms because they want to be heard. They're desperate to be heard. And the problem is that the audience has tremendous amount of choice, which wasn't there 10 years ago, which is why it's very hard to be heard in digital, and you need to position your messaging and the medium carefully if you want to get heard. So that the book takes you through all of those spaces and more.
Anjana, at this point, I'd like to bring in my editorial colleague, Vasudha Mukherjee, who's an avid reader and also read the book, into the conversation to ask the next set of questions before I rejoin. Vasudha, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. And can I just say thank you so much for sharing your book with us and being with us today on this platform and speaking with BW about your journey to writing this book. So you did mention that you guys wrote this book over the pandemic, and your collaboration took place mostly on online and through virtual. Can you tell me how that was maybe easier or more difficult for you to work with each other during this whole time? Or we can start with anyone.
Sure. I think it was, it smoothed the process. We couldn't travel, so we didn't have to even think about trying to get together, which is unfortunate, of course. But and the tools that are available today, of course, are very easy for working remotely for clients and companies, and also for collaborating on a project like this. So shared documents plus messaging platforms. We used a combination of those, and our experience as Wired journalists with deadlines to structure the book and assign the different portions and get it done. And we had periodic calls for updates to discuss things in person, so to speak, rather than just messaging and emailing.
Anjana, should I ask you the same question?
No, I think Audrey's really said it. It's, you know, and I think the shared experience of having worked in a newsroom where you needed to collaborate and do things fast and work as a team, that really helped us. That sort of discipline, I'm quite grateful for.
And Mary, any additional comments or?
No, I definitely could add to that, and bridge back to the previous comment about how today we are almost overwhelmed with channels to communicate on, and that's what's made digital harder when you're getting your message out. Yes, we had the tools we needed to collaborate, and it was easy because we've worked in newsrooms, but I think we also were overwhelmed with the options of tools we could work with. Do we write in Word and collaborate? Do we write in Google Docs and collaborate? Do we message each other on WhatsApp? Or no, wait, Messenger. Oh, wait, no, I'll send you an email. Or do we talk to each other? You know, your phone is beeping and you never know where the next message is coming from or where you should put the next message. So I think in a way, the collaboration process that we went through, we really felt the pain of the multiple of digital channels that you have in regular messaging.
But there were some upsides too, right? Like, you know, when you're frustrated with each other, you don't have the can't immediately scream at someone. You just be like, okay, well, let me see how this sounds on paper first.
Exactly. And do we do it in Slack or Trello, or how are we planning it out? What's our timeline? It's yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. Also, I just want to ask, like, you know, you're writing this book about storytelling. So what makes this book different from any other book about storytelling?
So I think I'll go back to what readers have been telling us, because that's important as well. Reader feedback, the reader feedback that we have is that the book is really one of the most comprehensive books in the market. It tells you not just about the elements of storytelling, you know, how do you write the message line in an email properly? How do you do a presentation properly? How do you differentiate between your mission statement and your messaging? It also tells you what the various channels are, the mediums are on which you can deploy it. How do you identify your audience and talk in language that, you know, your audience understands? And I think some of the elements which people tend to forget a lot, but they're around us all the time, which is people. You know, it's a huge part of our everyday life. We communicate with each other. We're talking right now as people, as individuals. And so it forces you to focus on what works, what's basic, what's around you. And I would say it's like a building block. If you get this right, everything else that you will face, and there will be a lot of disruptions in technology, you know, which are led by the device and so on, you'll be able to crack all of it. That's my belief.
Great. Thank you. Does anyone want? Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead.
I would add that it's called a handbook, but that doesn't make it a textbook. It's useful for everyone from students to experienced professionals. And one thing that we did, we made an effort to do as storytellers, was to write it in an entertaining, engaging way. So it's not a heavy duty teaching book. It's not, you know, rules and rules and rules. And it's got the other element that we worked hard on was to provide a lot of real-time examples, both good and bad, of successes and failures in storytelling in the corporate world, in politics, and not too much politics, don't worry. And then Mary Beth's idea, which she can elaborate on, was to have the exercises at the end of each chapter, which we also hope are fun for people to do.
I was really curious about the exercises because it was an interesting place to just kind of stop and actually think about what you are doing and how to implement that. What made you want to add the exercises? Mary, you're the one who started, right?
Sure. Yeah. So before I moved back to Stockholm, I was teaching at University of North Carolina journalism in the communications department at the Pembroke campus. And the hardest thing for any teacher when you get started is to do that course plan that includes things that engage the students in the topics. So you can talk about it, but unless you have something that makes them do it themselves, they don't really remember what you're saying. So exercises and finding other people's exercises became like the thing that the professor does the month before class is starting. You're desperately trying to find what's the best out there. So from that experience, I thought if you're going to use this as a book for teaching, it'd be great to have the exercises in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those definitely made me, at least it gave me a stop. And I love the examples that you use. They're very relatable. Not all of them, but some of them are relatable. And it's good that there's a variety of those throughout the book. And there's never a dull moment. And you're saying that this is for students, yeah, from students to professionals. Was it difficult to kind of manage that kind of an audience? Like, a student has different expectations, a professional has too much expectation. You don't want to be too difficult for one or too easy and boring for the other. How did you guys balance that out?
That's a good question.
And that's, yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say, I think we didn't think of it that way. I think we took the approach that if you picked up this book, you're curious, and we're all constant learners. We're all always on a learning journey. So we tried to write exercises that fit what we wanted to teach, what we wanted to tell or show. So the exercises were written to the content, not and to speak to all audiences who are curious.
Thank you, Mary. Audrey?
Everyone wants to and needs to learn how to tell a story. And in our careers, we've encountered people really struggling with it. How do I tell that? And helping them tell it better. All three of us are involved in that in our professional lives. And so we thought in that way, it automatically has relevance to a broad range of people, from students to professionals who are curious about how to do this right.
Anjana, any comments you want to add?
Yeah, so I think all I would add is that a lot of the stuff that we thought about and ideated was also based on the feedback that I was getting routinely as a professional. I run a content strategy firm called Content Pixies, and we deal with clients, and the kind of questions that clients would pose made us think, well, if this is a problem for a client, and some of them are, mid-level managers, some of them are senior level managers, and they're genuine questions because there's so much of clutter and noise out there and how to do it better. So it seemed appropriate to take those learnings and use examples to explain those concepts.
Right. That makes sense. You took what you already knew and you put it into a handbook. That's perfect. I mean, I think that's exactly what we're looking for. And also as a journalist, I actually really enjoyed some of the chapters I actually went straight towards. And I'm going to start with that chapter. It's actually killer headlines, because even now, all my senior editors have always changed my headlines. I never write good headlines. But what made you want to add that chapter? Is this something that everyone struggles with? I would love to know.
I think it's absolutely essential to have a good headline. Mary Beth is the one who remembers the numbers, but people won't click on it if you don't. It's just crucial. And so we try to give our best tips for getting it right. That said, it also says in the book that you have to write dozens of them before you hit on the right one. And I can't say that I do that every single time. We don't always have time. But if you keep trying, if you ask a question like we did in the title of the book, if you can engage readers and not give everything away, but not be dishonest, it's a skill that needs to be honed.
Definitely. Is this something that any of you have personally struggled with, or
every day?
Every day?
Every day. I mean, I would agree that it definitely takes time, and you do get better if you keep at it. And I think back to when we were all young and entering the newsroom in London, there were 3 senior editors who sat there. None of them are with us anymore. Gerard Bray, John Sims, Larry King. And they would sit and banter back and forth and take one story and write 17 headlines and then pick the best one. And it was always, always really good. And it was always better than anything we young cub reporters could come up with. But fast forward 25 years, and we in our jobs are all the ones who are rewriting the headlines for the communities we work with. So I think we've gotten there, and hope that we can inspire the next generation, because it really is, once you get into it, it's so much fun to try and rewrite headlines and work and collaborate on them. So it's a journey.
It takes more than one person a lot of times. You've got to bounce ideas off people, and it's so crucial to take that extra time to think maybe this is the right one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And your book has a great headline too. Definitely attention grabbing. So I think you guys all nailed that. Let's move on to the next parts of it. Like you talked about the different elements of storytelling. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that? What are the different elements of storytelling?
Well, there's lots of elements of storytelling, but what we've described in the book is you have to start, before you tell the story, you have to start thinking about who you're talking to, what message you want to get across, because that's how you decide how to structure the story. That said, if you're writing, even if you're doing a video script, you start with what's called the lead, which is, you already know this, which is, it encapsulates everything, but it also needs to draw the reader in. You don't want to just put it all out there and then have the person be done reading. So, and then you want to give the big picture. So you give some details, you give usually what and why in the first paragraph, and then you want to give the big picture, which is sometimes known as the why should I care paragraph. Put it in the broader context of whatever topic it is. And then you can get into the detail. And if you're talking about people, or you're talking, which I hope you are, or you're sharing some corporate news, then you want a quote in there that really gets to the core of your message, and that doesn't repeat the facts, but just gives the values that stand behind whatever you're trying to communicate.
Right, and you guys do have chapters like on videos and talking about numbers also. And obviously those are specific to certain types of writing, certain types of storytelling. It's not necessarily something that everyone needs to know about. So I just want to know, when you read the book to our readers, should they go in a chronological manner, or can they jump around? According to what chapter they want? Yeah.
No, so they don't need to go in a chronological manner, and I think that in some ways is the beauty of the book, and that's initial feedback that we have from some of the readers, that you can kind of dive into the chapter that interests you. So, for example, I had a couple of people call and say, we love the stuff on podcasts, because podcast is now like a thing. Everybody wants to do one, but it sort of takes you through the basics of how do you do a good podcast, what are the rules? I mean, what are the good podcasts out there that you can probably listen to and emulate or not emulate, what could be the ideal length of a podcast. There's even a 2-minute podcast. So it clarifies a lot of things for you. And so for anyone who wants to, I would say you should use the book in a way that suits you and serves you. What is it that you're after? What element of storytelling are you after? And go for that chapter. But it's always great to read the first half of the book to understand what the basics are and get the basics right.
No, absolutely. And then, like you said, it's for everyone. So someone who's starting up can go through the whole thing, and people, maybe if they're looking for something specific, can go exactly to that part. They have their exercises, they have their examples. Tell me about death by jargon.
I have an example. Can I give you an example from today that I just used in my last meeting? So we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and when you talk about diversity and inclusion, you think about people of different cultures or different genders, but actually you can be very exclusive, not including people, by using words that they don't understand. And I'll give you one piece of jargon, which is an acronym, and it's this thing called CDPA. CDPA is something we talk about all the time here at Electrolux. And CDPA in the UK stands for Copyright Design and Patents. But in the US, it stands for Consumer Data Protection Act. But here at Electrolux, it stands for Consumer Driven Product Approach. So if you choose a piece of jargon like that to use that, you completely guarantee that you're going to alienate most of your audience because they all think it means something else and no one's going to understand what you've said. So you're being exclusive, you're losing your audience, and you're not getting your message across. So that's failing on many, many fronts.
Thank you. Audrey, it seemed like you wanted to say something too about.
No, I want to. Angela knows a lot about this topic, and she came up with that. I think she came up with the great title for that chapter as well. In addition,
absolutely.
So it's definitely a good title.
You know, I think what Marybeth said makes a lot of sense, especially in India, because I think when I returned to India, the first thing that shocked me in the newsroom was what I started calling the alphabet soup. I was walking out of one alphabet soup meeting to another. You know, people would just use acronyms which were completely alien and foreign to me. You know, so that's one part of jargon where people just throw acronyms and they think it's fashionable. The other part is that they use words which they think are universal and are accepted. And, you know, at this point, I'm actually going to read from the book. Here it is, right? And this is really interesting because I can bet you that most of the audience that's watching this probably doesn't think this is jargon. So this is like actually a great test for them. It's like an interactive test for them, right? Low-hanging fruit, synergy, right sizing, cutting edge, brain drain, competitive advantage, deep dive, drill down, granular, human capital, bandwidth, ecosystem, human capital, ballpark. I mean, we use ballpark all the time in our conversations. So all of this is jargon. And what we're trying to say is, well, step back and ask yourself, what exactly do you mean? And if you don't know what you mean, there's a really good chance that your audience doesn't know that either. And one of the things that we've done in that chapter is we've been a little naughty. We've taken actual press releases and we've reproduced them. And then we've told you how to say it better in just one sentence, and you know how to get rid of say synergy, which appears 3 times in the first paragraph, and I think there was another one in which ecosystem, that's my favorite word, ecosystem, appears like 5 times in 50 words or 20 words, and how you can say that without using the jargon.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed reading that because, see, I had the same experience, coming back to India. I have no idea what anyone is saying. Any email I received, I would call my journalist friends and be like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And nobody would know. And also, like, even abroad, the same thing, people would use some jargon and I would just be like, I'm lost. I don't know what's happening right now. And it's funny you mentioned press releases because that's a big exercise we have all the interns do, is basically turn a 2-page press release into 1 paragraph.
Oh, then I guess you need to write this book for everyone in your office. Here you go.
Yes, absolutely.
We've all had that job.
Yeah. It's very fun because everyone's the world class. Everyone is pioneering. Everyone is a leader, right? Also, I'm going to move on because there's a lot to cover in your book, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. You talked about social media also, which of course is so important in this day and age. But was there any part of you that was worried that maybe this could lose relevancy in a few years because you're talking about very particular platforms, and platforms aren't something that are necessarily going to stay or forever? So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that.
So I think with the social media chapters, what we've done is we've stuck to the basics. We've told you why, for example, depending on your profile and your business, an Instagram would be more suitable for you versus a LinkedIn, or say why companies and people are on Twitter. And there is always a danger that you will always be racing behind the changes in social media. And we did have to update some of the details in the chapter. For example, I think when we wrote it, President Trump was growing great guns. By the time the book came out, the publishing, Twitter had clamped down on his account.
Yeah.
So, it also shows you the other side, the power of social media companies and people. I think as we move on, we learn more and more about that. But we've tried to pare it down to the basics so that the readers understand the use or the utility factor for each of these mediums and then deploy it. And it's going to be a constant learning for all of us, for us and for our readers, because we'll always be led by the changes that the social media companies impose on us. And also to an extent, the devices. I mean, the device experience also will dictate how social media companies change the usage. So to me, it seems this is a constantly evolving field, and there'll be some that become unfashionable and some that suddenly go viral.
Yeah, and maybe we can see a part 2 or sequel or like another edition of the book come out when something changes. Is that something you guys have planned for?
We haven't planned for it.
Jumping the horse a little bit.
Of a breathless exercise at the way at which things are changing, probably.
Yeah, no, definitely. You also decided to add public speaking. Why add that in your storytelling book?
Because a lot of people use public speaking to communicate. And, as a consultant, I get a lot of inquiries from CXOs saying, we've got a huge speech coming up. How should we start it with an anecdote? Should we start it with an anecdote? Should it be a presentation? What should it be? So like I said earlier, a lot of the stuff in the book is based on real problems that people experience and how do you solve that? And public speaking is a platform, and Maribeth to talk a little bit more about this because she's written this wonderful chapter on business, how to build leadership profiles. And public speaking is just a small part of that, but it's how you as a leader will communicate and tell the story of your company or the personal values that you bring to the table, which is relevant for your audience. And that's really the reason we put it in, because it is a very popular way to talk about the company and yourself.
Maribeth, would you like to expand on that a little bit?
I think that's right. I think Anjana said it just right. And maybe to add to it, public speaking is something that people are deathly afraid of. So to write a little comment on a post on social media or LinkedIn, okay, they can do it, but actually get up in front of people and talk, that requires some coaching and that requires some help. And so I think it's good to revisit public speaking in the context of the rest of the book. So yeah, start with an anecdote, but that's part of the storytelling that we've talked about in the front of the book. So anything we would apply to many of these mediums is already part of the elements that we talk about in the beginning. It's just a matter of picking the elements that you want to use in the different scenarios that you're in, whether you're writing a blog or doing a podcast or speaking in front of people or in different environments.
And that makes sense. Is there any particular chapter that you absolutely loved working on, like each of you? If I can go through. Audrey, can you start?
Sure. Well, I did crisis communications for a few years, and that's the chapter that I found most fun, not because I didn't write about the crisis that I'd been managing, but just to hope that I was that I would be helping people in the future manage something that can affect the people, the company, and the world. And there are lots of different kinds of crises. And I found that some of the things I learned would be useful across the board. And also looking into the history of crisis communications was quite interesting, but that's kind of a nerdy thing that I got into. But I think, the message in that chapter is to be honest, be straightforward, give as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, which some people think is not the way to go, but that is the way to go. Informed people are calmer people and feel that they're being supported in whatever crisis it is. So I hope readers find that chapter useful and informative.
Was it also your favorite chapter to read, or did you like someone else's chapter a little bit more?
Well, the one I learned the most out of might have been the data chapter. Haven't necessarily been a numbers person, but Maribeth has learned a lot in the recent years of her career on how to present data and how to visualize it effectively, and how much it enhances a story and how valuable it can be to validate your story, to make it authentic, to make it believable, and to get the message across with something other than words. And I found that to be I learned a lot from that, and I learned a lot about new forms of communication, like user-generated content from a chapter that Anjana wrote. So it's been fun all around.
Thank you, Audrey. Anjana, what about you? What was your favorite chapter to write and what was your favorite chapter to read?
I think to write was definitely Death by Jargon, because that's, I think, where we've been the naughtiest.
Yeah.
So that was fun, we've taken pot shots at press releases and even how consultancies speak. I don't have a favorite baby in terms of all the chapters, because they've all been written with thought and care. But there's one part of the book that I love, because we're three women who've written this book. We made a conscious effort to put in a lot of women examples. And that, I think, we're particularly proud about. And for me, every time I read those women examples, I tell myself, well done that you made an extra effort to put those examples in.
That's lovely. Mary Beth, what about you? What was your favorite chapter to write and your favorite chapter to read? And they can be the same.
I think the writing, the ones that we did last were probably the most exciting because they felt so relevant. And so for me to write the chapter on leadership profiling and positioning was something I was doing a lot of at the time, and it was really, really fun to do. To read, so you don't laugh at me, but I actually felt that going back to the very first chapter of the book was my favorite to read, because you know all of these things. You know that it's about the audience. You know it's about the mission and the message, but it was put together so lovely, so succinctly in that first chapter that I find myself going back to it every time someone comes to me with a communications question or wants advice. I find myself going back to that first chapter and saying, wait a minute. So what's your message? Wait. Who are you trying to talk to? And so I've been applying that chapter more than anything else in the last few months. Sorry, I had to pull up my book to go and make sure I wasn't missing a chapter and read them all. So nice to see it.
Yeah, no worries. But also, do you think working together was also that way interesting, because you got to learn so much about things that you probably didn't pay attention to, find out things that other people struggled with that you didn't realize was an issue in writing? Or were you more or less on the same page throughout your journey?
I would say, 90% on the same page. And then where we weren't on the same page, it was because we had different experiences. So it just made the book richer. So we could add the experiences of all three and get more than us individually.
Yeah. Can you tell me, what are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're writing?
How much time do we have?
I think it's that they use big words that are hard to understand. I mean, that's what I found the most, both in my newsroom career and when I look at press releases that companies send out, or when I attend meetings. There's a tendency to use big words because somehow people think if I use a big word, it sounds important and my message sounds important. What we found is, and what conventional wisdom tells you and what all writers will tell you, is that it's much harder to write simply so that the audience can understand. And really, I think in this book, we've done a little bit of show, don't tell, by writing in a way that is relatable and conversational. I mean, I really hope we've achieved that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's so true. I mean, and people do sound more important when they use big words. We just don't know what the message is, but it sounds important, of course. And Mary Beth, let me rephrase the question a little bit. What was that one lesson that you were like, we absolutely need to have in this book? The first chapter.
Well, I don't know if there's any one, but if you go back to your mistakes, I think the one thing people can do and apply to everything they do right away is to think about their headlines, using active verbs in their headlines, using engaging content in their headlines. And when I say headlines, I don't mean headlines of a story. I mean your subject line. I mean the text you send, or the WhatsApp question you ask. But particularly, I think for most of us working, the thing you put in the subject line of your email, that's your headline. And depending on what you write and how engaging that is, how active that is, people may or may not read what you're sending them. So when we talk about headlines, I don't think we should think about I'm writing a headline for a newspaper. It's actually, we do it every single day.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Audrey, You're smiling, so I'm hoping.
Oh, I agree. Well, because I agree with Mary Beth, and Anjana for sure. People are not using simple language the way we tried to do in the book, but I would add something that we've alluded to earlier, which was to write down what you want to say, and then read it and pretend you're the audience, pretend you're the person you're speaking to. But for example, if you really are trying to simplify something, or you suddenly realize you need to simplify something, then think, what if I told my mother or my aunt or my uncle this story? Would they understand? And I've done stories like that where I just rewrote someone's bio or something in such a way that a broader audience would understand, for an academic or a scientist. And they took that and they said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I can explain to my family what I do for a living. And that and they could tell their story just because I reworked their bio a little bit to take out some of the jargon and to make it more personable, and because I was able to make that shift, and I think people need to do that a little bit more often.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and thank you for pointing those out. I think we are all guilty of doing that at some point in our life, where I think it's also a lazy way to kind of go about it, when you just go like, well, I'm just going to go with this headline, this big word, and this little jargon, and it's going to all sound good. But I do want to. But I wanted to also ask you all, why choose a book? Because you are a journalist, you know that we talk about all these different mediums of getting out there, YouTube channels, podcasts. Why did you guys choose to have a book instead of maybe say have a podcast?
The question is why not? Well, because primarily we were writers. Yeah. And I personally didn't want to do television, though I know video is really popular. I didn't want to do YouTube because I think I had some amount of television fatigue after being a national channel. And personally for me, I've always loved reading and I've loved writing. So this was something that I could do naturally and easily. And that's, if you want to succeed at something, try with the stuff that you can do well. So I think that's a basic formula that I applied.
That's right.
I also think. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. You go.
That's right. That was the most natural choice. But once we kind of pulled together and realized how much we know about this subject, and then we started thinking of it in terms of a guide, a handbook, that I suppose could have been presented in a series of, I don't know how long a series of podcasts, but I think the idea that it could be a handbook that everyone could use was something that we found quite that could be quite attractive to readers, to have it all together in a book.
Yeah,
which is obviously available digitally as well, so you don't have to purchase like a big textbook.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I was going to jump in and say. And to case in point, to make it more of an anecdote, when was the last time you went back to a podcast and said, "Oh, I want to find that spot when they were talking about that thing. Was it at 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 7.5 minutes?" With a book, you could just pull it off the shelf. You kind of remember the chapter, or if you have it digitally in a Kindle, even better, you can search for the words. You can go. It is a handbook. You want to go back to it and use it again. And so this medium makes it easier to use as a reference point than, say, other ways of producing it.
Right. No, that makes absolute sense. And I also prefer books over, I love podcasts, but like you said, it's difficult to sometimes and sometimes you fall asleep and then you don't know where you left off. And those can always be difficult.
And maybe we're a little old-fashioned, so there's that too.
I mean, old-fashioned's coming back in. I mean, that's what millennials do. That's what Gen Z will do. It'll be retro and it'll be cool again.
Right, we're retro, not old-fashioned. That's better.
Right. I also want to, I'm sorry, I know I'm asking you a lot of questions and I don't want you to give away too much of the book because obviously we want people to come and read it. But what are some things that you would say one should absolutely not do when writing the story? Because you talk about all things we should do, but what are the big no-nos?
So, one of the things that, and I've written about this separately on other platforms, is I'm going to borrow this, millennial word FOMO.
Yeah.
People think that they need to be on every single platform, and that, if they have a message, they've got to be on Facebook, they've got to be on LinkedIn, they've got to be on Insta, they've got to be just pretty much everywhere. And what we have found consistently is that all of these mediums take up a lot of time. It is time consuming, building all your profiles and being consistent and being responsive. And your audience isn't on all the platforms. Your audience is on one or two platforms. And that goes back to the beginning of the book, like Mary Beth said, the first chapter, because it nails everything down for you. It says, know your audience. So the thing that you need to do is know your audience. Not everyone is your audience. You don't have to speak to everyone. You have to speak to your audience and build a relationship with your audience. So don't try to be everywhere. That's the thing that I would say. Be where you belong. Don't try to belong where you don't belong.
Right.
I think Anjana's nailed it in terms of putting it in. I prefer to put it in terms of what you should do rather than what you shouldn't do. To draw a parallel with, for example, job seekers. Sometimes people put out on platforms, even on LinkedIn, I'm looking for a job. I have this degree. I know these languages, and I'll do anything. And that doesn't appeal to any employers. And the same with your story and your channels. You need to craft your story. What is it that you're good at? What is it that you want to say? What is that you can contribute? What story is it that you can contribute to, and who will benefit? Or who do you want to reach with it? And that helps you choose the angle of the story, the way the story is written, the medium and the channel, and hopefully you'll have measurable results.
Any comments there, Beth?
I might fall somewhere in between the two of my co-authors, that I think less is more. And so if you do try and hit all the channels, you risk spamming people. I know when I go from Facebook to Insta and I see the same person posting the same thing twice, I get a little annoyed with it. Also when you're reading people's information on LinkedIn or whatever, gosh, if you can't say your main theme in 6 words, then who's going to read the whole thing? And if a CD is 7 pages long, maybe you're not focused enough. And so if you can't narrow it down into a succinct message, then less is more.
No, you're absolutely correct. I think we've had such a wonderful conversation, so I'd actually like to wrap things up over here. But as a final comment, what would you like to say to the budding writer? Advice, comments, except buy the book and go free.
Yeah, I would say buy the book.
Okay, yeah.
Buy the book.
And where can we find the book in your respective countries?
Only on Kindle outside of India until December. In December, you can buy it hard copy. But for now, Kindle's the only place, unless you're inside India, then you can buy the book.
All right. In that case, we can go into our local stores and find it.
You can definitely do that. Thank you so much for having us. This was lovely.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come here and speak with us today on BW Business World. If anyone wants to rewatch this, you can do this on all of our social platforms. We're also on YouTube, LinkedIn, on Facebook, on our own BW Business World page. We're everywhere. But that's because we've already told our story. We're just now letting the world know about it. This is What's Your Story? The Essential Business Storytelling Handbook by Audrey Berkner, Anjana Menon, Mary Beth Sandel, and I really hope I said your names right. Please let me know if it was not the case. Okay, thank you so much. And please join us again. We're doing more books almost every Monday. We're having a dialogue with an author and about their book. Same time, same place, same platforms. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.